The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed on Emma's chest and made her heart beat louder than it should. Daniel had gone to bed after finishing his homework, leaving her alone in the living room with nothing but her thoughts for company. The scarf David had returned lay across her lap, soft beneath her fingers. She hadn't meant to keep holding on to it, but it felt different now, not just fabric, but a reminder of the man who had stood at her door. His warm eyes searching hers as if he wanted to say something more, but hadn't. Emma leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. For years she had told herself her story was finished. Love had found her once in Michael, and when he died, it had left with him. Everything after that was just survival raising Daniel, keeping the house together, breathing through the ache. But lately, something inside her was stirring. The birthday party had reminded her she could still laugh. Daniel's honesty had forced her to face truths she wanted to ignore. And David, kind, gentle, patient, David had walked into her life at the exact moment her heart was beginning to wake. She felt guilty even thinking it. The thought of loving someone else was tangled with grief. Would Michael feel betrayed? Would Daniel feel confused? Would she lose the memory of the life she had built if she dared to create something new? Emma closed her eyes, clutching the scarf. "Michael," she whispered into the silence, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do. I still love you. I always will. But our boy is right time so lonely. And I don't know if it's wrong to want more. To want laughter again. To want someone to hold me." Tears slid down her cheeks as the words tumbled out. Words she had kept buried for years. Her phone buzzed on the table. She jumped, swiping at her tears quickly. She reached for the phone, her breath catching when she saw the name. David Miller. Her heart stuttered. She hesitated, staring at the glowing screen before finally opening the message. "I hope I didn't overstep today. I just wanted to return the scarf. But if you'd ever like company, I'd be honored to share a coffee or just listen." Emma's hand shook as she set the phone down. She read the message again and again, as if the words might change. They didn't. They stayed simple, kind, and without pressure. Just an offer of presence. She pressed her palms to her face, overwhelmed. Part of her wanted to delete the message, to lock her heart away again, to stay safe in the world she knew. But another part, the part Daniel had seen, longed to answer. Longed for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could live again instead of simply surviving. Her thoughts raced. Back to her son. Dad wouldn't want you to be alone forever. She pictured Daniel's eyes so full of hope and honesty. He wasn't trying to replace his father. He just wanted his mother to smile again, to laugh again, to live again. Emma picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Her breath trembled as she began to type. "Thank you for the message. I don't know if I'm ready, but maybe coffee would be nice sometime." She stared at the words, her heart pounding, her chest tight. Her finger hovered over the send button for what felt like forever. Then, with one shaky breath, she pressed it. The message was gone. Sent. Emma set the phone down quickly, as though it burned her hand. She stood pacing the living room, her thoughts racing. What had she done? Was this a mistake? But then the phone buzzed again. She froze, her pulse racing. Slowly, she picked it up. David's reply was simple. "No rush. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." Emma sank back into the couch, tears spilling down her cheeks, not of grief this time, but of something softer. Relief, hope, for the first time in years. She allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined only by loss. A future where laughter might return, where someone might stand at her side, not to erase Michael's memory, but to walk with her into a new chapter. She glanced toward the hallway, where Daniel slept peacefully in his room. She whispered into the quiet, "Maybe you're right, sweetheart. Maybe Dad wouldn't want me to be alone forever." She wrapped the scarf around her shoulders, her heart a mixture of sorrow and anticipation. She wasn't healed. She wasn't ready for everything. But she had taken one step, and sometimes one step was enough to change everything. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the kitchen, warm and golden. Emma poured coffee as Daniel patted in, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mom." he mumbled. Sliding into his chair. Morning, she replied softly, setting his plate of pancakes in front of him. For a moment, she just watched him, her heart swelling with love. He looked up, noticing the small smile tugging at her lips. What? He asked, confused. Emma leaned down and kissed the top of his head. Nothing, she said, her voice steady but warm. Just, thank you. Daniel gave her a puzzled look, but shrugged. Digging into his pancakes, and as Emma turned to pour her own coffee, her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't have to check to know who it was. Her heart fluttered not with guilt this time, but with something dangerously close to hope. That night, with a simple message and her son's unwavering honesty, everything had changed. It was the beginning of something Emma never thought she'd find again. The chance to laugh, to love, and to live. I'm not alone, she whispered, her voice breaking. I have you. Daniel shook his head again, this time more firmly. It's not the same, Mom. I can tell you're lonely. I can tell you miss him, but you could smile like that again, you know? If you let yourself. Emma's chest ached. Here was her 12-year-old son urging her toward a truth she had locked away. She had convinced herself she was fine, that love was a one-time gift, that she had already lived her story. She thought if she stayed busy enough, loved her son enough, the ache would fade. But Daniel's honesty stripped all her excuses bare. She reached for his hand again and held it tightly. I loved your dad very much, she said softly. More than I can ever explain. And when he died, a part of me went with him. I don't know if I could ever. She stopped, unable to finish. Daniel squeezed her hand. I just want you to be happy again. Emma pulled him into her arms, holding him close. His head rested against her shoulder, and she buried her face in his hair, fighting back tears. You are the best part of my life, Daniel. You always will be. But even as she said it, she felt the weight of his words pressing against her. When Daniel left for school, Emma lingered in the kitchen long after the dishes were cleared. She sat with her coffee, staring out the window, her thoughts circling endlessly. Could she really laugh again? Could she ever love again? Guilt washed over her at the very thought. Loving someone else felt like betraying Michael, as though opening her heart again would erase the life they had built. But another part of her whispered quietly, insistently, that perhaps love wasn't meant to die with loss. Daniel's words haunted her as she went about her day. They played in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. Dad wouldn't want you to be alone forever. Emma pressed her hand against her chest, her heart aching with a mixture of grief and something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in. Years, hope, and hope was terrifying. The day after Daniel's words, Emma felt like she was moving through a fog. She went through the motions, packing Daniel's lunch, dropping him at school, running errands, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. His question had burrowed deep inside her, refusing to let her rest. Why don't you laugh the way you used to with Dad? Dad wouldn't want you to be alone forever. She had tried to brush them off, but his words clung to her heart like ivy, wrapping around her every thought. By evening, she was exhausted, not just from the chores of the day, but from the weight of emotions she didn't know how to carry. She was sitting, at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the unopened mail when a knock at the door startled. Her first thought was Claire She, often dropped by unannounced, usually armed with advice Emma didn't want but somehow needed. But when she opened the door, it wasn't Claire, it was him. David Miller. Emma recognized him instantly, though she hadn't expected to see him again so soon. He had been at the birthday party the night before, standing off to the side, smiling politely when introduced, offering kind words but not pressing for conversation. He was a friend of Claire's husband, if Emma remembered correctly. Now, here he stood on her porch, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading light. He wore a simple jacket, his hands tucked into his pockets. And in one of those hands was a scarf. You forgot this last night, David said, his voice warm but hesitant. Claire told me it was yours. I thought I'd return it. Emma blinked, surprised. She hadn't even realized she'd left her scarf behind. "Oh," she said softly, reaching out to take it. Their fingers brushed, and the small contact sent a ripple through her she hadn't expected. "Thank you. That was kind of you." David gave a small smile, the corners of his brown eyes crinkling. "No trouble. I live not far from here. Besides, I thought it might be important." "Nights are still cold." Emma nodded, awkwardness tightening her chest. She was about to thank him again and close the door when a voice interrupted. "Hi, Mr. Miller." Daniel. He had come down the hall and now stood beside her, looking up at David with an excited grin. David's expression softened instantly. He crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over the boy. "Hey there. Daniel, right? You were at the party too. Claire introduced us." Daniel nodded eagerly. "Yeah, you remember my name?" "Of course," David said with a chuckle. "It's a good name." Strong Emma's heart twisted as she watched the exchange. Daniel's face lit up in a way it rarely did with strangers. Usually he was shy, but with David he seemed at ease. "Well, I should let you both enjoy your evening," David said, rising to his full height again. "It was good seeing you, Emma. And you, Daniel." Emma offered a polite smile. "Thank you again for bringing the scarf." But before she could close the door, Daniel blurted, "You can stay for dinner if you want." Emma froze, her cheeks warming. David laughed gently, raising his hands in a kind refusal. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to intrude." Daniel shrugged. "It's not intruding. Mom makes really good spaghetti." Emma placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder, embarrassed but also touched. "That's enough, Daniel." David's eyes lingered on hers for a moment. "And there's something unspoken but unmistakable." "Maybe another time," he said quietly, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised her. And then he was gone, walking back down the steps, the evening shadows stretching around him. Later that night, after Daniel was tucked into bed, Emma found herself sitting on the couch, the scarf lying across her lap. She ran her fingers over the fabric absent-mindedly. But her thoughts were not on the scarf. They were on him, on the way his eyes had softened when he looked at Daniel, on the warmth in his voice when he said her name, on the fact that for the briefest moment at the door, she had felt something stir inside her chest, something she hadn't felt in years, and it terrified her. Because what right did she have to feel that way? Michael's memory still lived in every corner of this house. She still wore her wedding ring, still dreamed of the life they had shared. To even think of another man of laughter, of companionship, felt like betrayal. But her son's words returned, piercing the silence of the room. "Dad wouldn't want you to be alone forever." Emma closed her eyes, clutching the scarf tightly. Maybe Daniel had seen what she couldn't. Maybe her son had recognized something in David that she wasn't ready to admit. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Claire. "So, did David bring you the scarf? Don't roll your eyes at my saw the way he looked at you last night." "Just saying." Emma's cheeks flushed as she set the phone down quickly. Leave it to Claire to notice everything. She leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. She told herself it was nothing, that it was just a polite, neighborly gesture. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Because even now, hours later, she could still hear his voice. "It was good seeing you, Emma." And for the first time in a long while, she found herself wondering what it might mean to hear those words again. Emma Collins had almost said no to the invitation. She had stared at the little white card for days, tucked halfway under a pile of unopened mail on her kitchen counter, pretending she hadn't seen it. Claire, her best friend since college, had written her name in big looping letters across the front. Emma, no excuses this time. For the past 3 years since her husband Michael's accident, Emma had become skilled at the art of avoiding. She avoided parties, avoided long conversations with neighbors, avoided anything that reminded her of the way life used to be when laughter and music filled her home. Grief had reshaped her into someone quieter, someone cautious. Someone who felt too heavy to belong anywhere joy was required. But Claire was relentless. She had called, texted, and even shown up at Emma's door 2 days before the party. It's just a birthday, Em. Nothing fancy, no pressure. Just friends, food, and music. You need this. Emma had smiled politely, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But somehow, between Claire's determination and her own desire to stop drowning in silence, she had said yes. And so, that evening, she found herself slipping into a simple navy dress she hadn't worn in years. She looked in the mirror and, almost startled, there was color in her cheeks, a faint spark in her eyes. She brushed her hair, dabbed on lipstick, and whispered to the reflection, "Just for tonight. Just breathe." The party itself had been gentle. Laughter swirled around her like soft music, never pressing too hard. Old friends greeted her kindly, not asking too many questions, not stepping into the shadows she carried. She drank a glass of wine, nibbled on cake, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself relax. At one point, Claire dragged her to the dance floor. And though Emma's body was stiff with hesitation, something shifted. She remembered how it felt to laugh, not the shallow kind she gave Daniel when she was tired, but a real laugh, one that lit her eyes. She caught herself smiling, not because she was supposed to, but because for that brief moment it felt good. By the time she slipped her coat over her shoulders and said her goodbyes, Emma realized her steps were lighter than when she had arrived. The night air was crisp, and as she drove home, she hummed softly to herself. It was a melody she didn't even recognize, but it felt like a memory of happiness returning. Yet the moment she opened the front door of her house, the silence swallowed her. It was a silence she knew too well, the kind that pressed against her chest and reminded her that no matter how much she smiled at parties, she would always return to this emptiness. The faint laughter from the evening still echoed in her ears, but it felt like it belonged to another world. Her eyes landed on the living room, where the lamp glowed dimly. There, curled up on the couch with a blanket, was Daniel, her 12-year-old son. His hair was a mess, sticking up at odd angles, and his face carried that mix of boyish innocence and growing maturity that always made her heart ache. He wasn't asleep. His eyes, those big blue eyes that reminded her so much of Michael, were wide open. "Waiting, hey kiddo?" Emma whispered, trying to sound casual. She set her purse on the chair and slipped off her shoes. "You should be in bed." Daniel sat up, his blanket sliding off his shoulders. He studied her, really studied her, as though he were trying to memorize every line of her face. "You were smiling when you came in," he said softly. Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Was I?" "Yeah," Daniel replied. His voice was quiet, but it carried something heavier than any 12-year-old should have to hold. "You don't usually smile like that." Emma's breath caught. For a second, she almost laughed it off, but the seriousness in his tone stopped her. His eyes searched hers, almost pleading. She sank down onto the couch beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "It was just a party, sweetheart. That's all." But Daniel shook his head slowly. "It wasn't just that. You looked different. Like when Dad was here." The words hit her like a wave, pulling her under. She forced a smile, but it trembled at the edges. "You should get some sleep," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his temple. He nodded, obedient as always, but as he stood to go to his room, he paused in the doorway. His small voice drifted back through the silence, carrying a weight she wasn't ready to hear. "Mom, I just want you to be happy again." Emma froze, her heart squeezing painfully. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She only sat there in the dim glow of the lamp, the echo of his words hanging in the air, shattering the fragile walls she had built around her grief. The laughter from the party was gone. What lingered now was the truth her son had spoken, gentle, honest, and impossible to ignore. And in that moment, Emma realized something had shifted. The night hadn't just ended at the party. No, it was only beginning here in the quiet of her home, with the boy who saw more than she wanted him to. The smile that had followed her inside faded, but the seed of something else, something frightening and uncertain, had been planted. The night stretched long after. Daniel had gone to his room. Emma sat motionless on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The lamp's glow cast soft shadows across the room, but she barely noticed. Her son's words kept replaying in her mind like an echo she couldn't escape. "I just want you to be happy again." She had thought she was hiding it well, the heaviness in her chest, the loneliness that followed her like a second skin. She smiled for Daniel, cooked his meals, asked about school, and tried her best to fill the void Michael had left. But children notice things. They noticed the cracks adults tried to cover. Emma rose and walked quietly to Daniel's room. She pushed the door open a few inches, enough to see his small frame curled beneath the blankets. His breathing was steady, his chest rising and falling with the calm rhythm of sleep. The innocence of his face tugged at her heart. He shouldn't have to carry this, she thought. He shouldn't have to worry about his mother's happiness when he was still just a child. Emma closed the door softly and leaned against the hallway wall. For a long time, she stayed there, hugging herself as though she could hold her broken pieces together. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the kitchen. The smell of toast filled the air as Emma moved automatically, spreading butter on slices of bread, pouring orange juice, and setting the table for two. She felt drained, like she hadn't truly slept. But she forced a smile when Daniel walked in, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice too bright. "Morning," he mumbled. Dropping into his chair, they ate in silence at first, the quiet broken only by the clink of silverware. Finally, Daniel glanced up, his blue eyes hesitant but steady. "Mom?" "Yes." "Can I ask you something?" Emma's hand froze halfway to her mouth. It was the same question from the night before, and instantly her chest tightened. She set her fork down slowly. "Of course, honey. You can always ask me anything." Daniel took a deep breath, his small fingers picking at the edge of his napkin. "Why don't you laugh the way you used to with Dad?" The question cut deeper than she imagined it could. Her throat went dry. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I do laugh," she said finally. But even she heard the hollowness in her voice. Daniel shook his head, his gaze steady. "Not really. Not like you did before. I remember. You used to laugh so much with Dad, like everything was funny. Even little things. But now?" His voice trailed off and he shrugged, though the sadness in his eyes said everything. "Now it feels like you're just pretending." Emma's breath shuddered. She looked at her son, the one person she had been trying to protect, hand, realized he had seen straight through her. She reached across the table, covering his small hand with her own. "Sweetheart, I laugh with you all the time." He pressed his lips together, then whispered, "But it's not the same." The honesty in his tone was sharper than any blade. Emma felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Daniel, I have you. You're all I need." Daniel stared down at the table, his lashes brushing his cheeks. "That's not true," he said quietly. Emma's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then lifted his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad wouldn't want you to be alone forever." Silence filled the room. Emma felt as if the air had been knocked from her lungs. Michael, even after 3 years. Saying his name or even hearing it was like stepping onto fragile glass. Memories flooded her. His laugh, the way he reached for her hand in crowded places, the way he carried Daniel on his shoulders through the park.